Good morning, class. Today we will be talking about Chapter 6 of your textbook, Analyzing Your Audience. Now, I know for my 3 o'clock class, we actually spoke a little bit about this last week before your midterm, where we spoke about the President Obama speech after the Tucson, Arizona shooting, and really got a good sort of introduction into what it means to analyze your audience when you're preparing and giving a speech. However, I want us to get a little bit deeper into this subject simply because it's going to be very crucial when you prepare your persuasive speech later on this month and next month. And so I want you to really grasp this subject and understand that it's very important to be audience centered, but to understand also that when you are audience centered, it doesn't mean that you're compromising your beliefs to get a favorable response from your audience, but it's mostly to keep your audience top of mind, so that you are making sure that your audience, leaves out of your speech either agreeing with your position, uh, thinking about your position, or actually, changing their position after having listened to your speech. So those are like the main objectives that you want to have in mind when you are giving a persuasive speech. And so the only way to meet those objectives is to make sure that you have an idea of who your audience is and how you'll get them to um, adapt accordingly, or to even think about your topic for your persuasive speech. So let's get into what it means to be audience centered. What's important here is that you want to understand the composition of your audience, right? The best way to understand your audience is to do it prior to you actually speaking. You would never want to walk into a room and not know who you're going to speak to. It's just not that that convenient for you, first of all, and then it's also not helpful for your audience, because if you don't prepare in advance to address the audience as they are, then essentially you will be preparing a speech uh, with a lot of assumptions about who your audience is, and that is never a good thing, because you won't be as effective as a speaker if you do that route, as opposed to studying your audience in advance so that you can understand, okay, I need to appeal to my audience in this way and not appeal to them in that way, etc. Okay? So when you are analyzing your audience, there are several questions that you want to keep in mind. You want to ask yourself, to whom am I speaking? To whom am I speaking? And what that means is exactly what we just said. We want to know who we're speaking to, right? What are their beliefs? Do they believe in a certain religion, right? If you're talking about, you know, if your informative speech, for example, is on Thanksgiving dinner, and you want to talk about the different menu options that you're going to eat within a Thanksgiving dinner, and part of the dinner, it's about pork, right? But you realize that 95% of your audience members are Muslim, right? You may want to reconsider the emphasis that you have on the pork component of your Thanksgiving dinner, and then put more emphasis maybe on the vegetable options that you'll be speaking about during your speech. So those are just some factors that you need to consider when you are analyzing your audience and preparing your speech. What religion background do they come from? What's their race? What's their gender? Those are very critical demographic components that we'll talk about later on. But getting right back into it, you also want to ask yourself, what do I want my audience to know, believe, or do as a result of my speech, right? Because essentially you want them to act in some way. You want them to think. You want them to believe something after you've given your speech, right? So that's an effective question to ask. Last but not least, you want to also ask yourself, what is the most effective way to write and present your speech? What does that mean? Essentially, if you set out to do an entertaining speech, a speech for entertainment, right? You need to know that because your audience is composed of, you know, older women or women between the ages of, 35 and 70, right? Some jokes may appeal to women who are older instead of those who are younger, right? You may have to use different references to, current events or historical events that appeal to that demographic, right? So that they can always connect with you. So you want to have those ingredients into your speech that you use in order to, after having considered your audience, but you can only have those, sort of components within your speech if you know exactly who you're going to speak to. So that is very, very, very critical in the beginning of composing your speech, but also throughout your speech. You want to also make sure that, you want to always make sure, rather, that your speech is constantly appealing to your audience in the most effective way possible throughout your speech. So, let's speak more in depth about gathering information about your audience. There are about 7 or so factors that you need to consider. I mentioned some of them just a couple of seconds ago, but these are factors that you need to always consider when you are analyzing your audience. You want to know their age, you want to know their gender, their religion, perhaps their sexual orientation, and most of all, not most of all, but in that same light of importance, you want to also understand their racial and cultural background. The reason why I almost said most important is because the racial and cultural background is one of the most often assumed things that speakers make. And I say that to say that because of our physical appearance, it almost gives the speaker an idea of who we are, right, on the outside. But essentially, the color of somebody's skin or the way they wear their hair, etc., is only a small detail into who they are as a person culturally and ethnically. And so I always want to make sure that you guys realize that you cannot judge a book by its cover. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about, not making assumptions that because we attend an HBCU, and if you look to your left and look to your right, that most of your classmates on the surface may appear African American, but I promise you, if you went and asked the majority of them if they identify with African American, some would say yes, but there would be some that say no. So you have to always be aware of those things that on the surface look apparent, right? The race of someone, but essentially you can't make assumptions because you just don't know. So how do you find out, right? How do you find out what sexual orientation your audience members are, or what racial or cultural background they are subscribed to? Because you don't want to make assumptions. What we will have to do is develop an audience analysis questionnaire. An audience analysis questionnaire. Now, an audience analysis questionnaire, it allows us to gather those important data points about our audience, that important information, right? Because essentially, you want to know what frame of reference your audience is going to use when they listen to your speech. So, for instance, your persuasive speech is going to be on a variety of topics, right? Some of you will talk about the issue of abortion. Others of you may talk about, the issue of student loan rates in America and how they should be lowered or higher accordingly, right? Those are really polarizing issues. And what I mean by polarizing is that there are people who are on either side of the issue, people that are for abortion, other people who are against the abortion. But you really want to know where your audience is coming from. This information is collected prior to giving your speech. So there are several ways you can collect this information. So we'll talk about three questions that you would want to ask, or three types of questionnaires that you would want to develop in order to get those answers from your audience. The first one is called a fixed alternative audience analysis, right? A fixed alternative audience analysis. That means that you develop a questionnaire that gives your audience members a fixed choice of responses, right? Meaning they have to choose between two or more responses. For instance, if your topic was on the legal system in America, right? You were specifically focused on, if someone was being, if they were on trial and they had three options of a plea agreement, right? They could plead guilty, not guilty, or insane. You would want to know from your audience if they agree, or if they, not even if they agree, right? Because your job is to, if your position is the affirmative, then you want them to agree. But if your position is the negative, you want them to disagree. So basically, you would design a fixed alternative questionnaire that would simply give you an understanding of whether or not your audience knows about the various plea agreements that citizens are entitled to once they are on trial. So a question that you could design would be simply, do you know what the insanity plea in the United States legal system is? Right? This question is simply to get information about where your audience stands, not where they stand on the issue, but how much information they know prior to hearing your speech. Why is this important? This is important because we can never make an assumption that because we're an expert on a particular issue that our audience is too. No, you want to know where they stand prior to you preparing your speech, because essentially, if you ask the question, do you know what the insanity plea in the United States system is, and 85% of your audience said they didn't know what the insanity plea is, then essentially you would have to put a lot of emphasis during your speech on defining exactly what the insanity plea means, right? You would not necessarily explain, or give a bunch of examples about cases that have happened where people pled insane. No, maybe the large portion of your speech would be more of a speech of definition, right? And then you would move into your persuasive components of your speech, right? But had you not known where your audience stood in their knowledge of this issue, then you would not have been able to design a speech that was specifically tailored to meet their knowledge and understanding about the topic. So when you design a fixed alternative questionnaire, you want to make sure that you have at least two responses that they can choose from. One response could be yes, another response could be no, another response could be not sure, or I don't know, or something along those lines, just so that you have options for your audience members to choose from, but you give them the options instead of them creating an option based off an open-ended questionnaire. And we'll talk about that a little later. So the next audience analysis questionnaire type is when you develop one that has scale questions. Scale questions. Scale questions resemble fixed alternative questions. However, they allow more leeway in responding. What does that mean? It means that your audience members are given intervals to decide from, as opposed to just, responding under, yes, no, or not sure, right? Those fixed questions are limiting, right? Because if you kind of know a little bit about the topic, but not really, then you are really stuck because you can only choose from your yes, your no, or your not sure responses in the fixed alternative question analysis. But in your scale questions, you give them intervals to choose from as opposed to just those hardcore yes no responses. For instance, if you want to use that same question, right, how often or do you know what the insanity plea in the United States legal system is, you would perhaps, instead of using the yes, no, not sure answers, you would maybe say, you would maybe redesign your question so that people have a variety to choose from. For instance, perhaps you would ask the question, how often do you believe the insanity plea is used in the United States court system, right? Maybe they can say very seldom, and if you refer to your textbook on page 111, you can see that there's a gradient, right? So there's on one far left side, there is a category that says very seldom. In the middle, you have these little brackets, right? And then on the far right side, you have very often. So in between very seldom and very often, your audience members can sort of check off where they think the insanity plea is used in the United States, like how often that insanity plea is used. And if that is a little bit foggy because of the explanation, what you should do is refer to page 111 and you'll see exactly what I mean by designing a questionnaire that has scale questions. Simply put, it gives your audience a larger pool of responses to choose from without constraining them to just a yes-no response like a fixed question does. So after you move from the fixed alternative questions to your scale questions, what you really want to also consider is your open-ended questions. Your open-ended questions are exactly what it sounds like. You're giving your audience members the opportunity to write in their responses as opposed to you choosing pre-ordered responses for them. For instance, you would design a question that would want to get their opinion on the topic as opposed to their knowledge about a topic. So the opinion-based question would be, what is your opinion about abortion, right? You want to know where they stand on the topic of abortion. So you wouldn't say yes, your responses wouldn't be, yes, no, or not sure. Why? Because you just designed a question that did not require a fixed response. It required an open-ended response, meaning that if you ask a member of your audience, what is their opinion about abortion, what do you expect them to say? Maybe a response would be, I think that abortion is useful in the case of rape, right? That would be an open-ended response to your question, right? As opposed to a closed or scale question response on that topic. So, although open-ended questions invite more detailed responses than the other two types of questions, they also increase the likelihood of getting answers that do not give the kind of information that you need, right? Because someone may go off on a tangent about, for the abortion example, they may go off on a tangent about, religion and why they feel that abortion should not be permitted because of their religious beliefs, their background, maybe they had an abortion. It could open up sort of Pandora's box, meaning that you can get a bunch of responses that are not even related to your topic, but because you provided an open-ended question, you're entitling your audience to be free with their particular responses as opposed to a fixed alternative questionnaire. They're just constrained to yes, no responses. And so what I want you guys to understand is that you have the freedom to design your questionnaire in either of these categories. And it doesn't have to be a long questionnaire, right? Because all you want to do is get the key information from your audience so that you can be able to tailor your speeches accordingly. So it doesn't have to be anything extended. Once again, if you're a little bit confused because you can't actually see these questionnaires written out, refer to page 111 and you'll actually see the examples that I mentioned earlier written out. So we're getting right back into your homework. I mentioned it briefly, but basically I want you guys to design an audience analysis questionnaire. What you're going to do is you're going to go through the steps that we came up with last week. You want to choose a topic, right? Choose a topic. Then develop your general purpose. Is your general purpose to inform, entertain, or persuade? Choose one of those three. Then of course you want to develop a specific purpose, right? What's your specific purpose? After you've decided that your speech is to inform your audience about using less fuel for their car, right? Maybe your specific purpose would be, my specific purpose is to inform our audience about the negative impact that using a lot of fuel has on the environment, right? That's your specific purpose. And then you want to develop your central idea. Now, your central idea can include the three main points that will be included in the body of your speech, right? Perhaps, using the fuel or gasoline example, your three main points would be, fossil fuels, natural gas, and alternative gas vehicles, right? In order to inform your audience about the impact that using gasoline or fuel has on the environment, right? You will focus on three main points. So based off of that, I want you all to develop an audience analysis questionnaire about your topic. So using that same example, if I'm wanting to inform my audience about the impact that using fuel has on the environment, I want to know exactly what they know about the topic already, right? So I would design a questionnaire that simply asks them, maybe a question would be like, what do you want, or do you know that 95% of America's oil comes from foreign countries, right? And if they say no, if they say yes, then that's great, because then I can tailor my speech one way. If they say no, then I can tailor my speech another way. If they are not sure, then I just know that I have to do more to educate them about this topic than I would normally. So that's an example of how you can develop a questionnaire that gives you information about your audience's frame of reference so that you can then design a speech that caters toward them directly. Now, if you guys have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Definitely before Monday, but this assignment is going to be due on Monday. You don't have to email it to me. I am going to call on you to present this in class. So just be prepared on Monday to give your classmates and myself your homework, but you'll be, speaking it aloud instead of handing something in. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this was helpful. But always refer to your textbooks so that you can actually follow everything that I'm talking about over this audio. Have a great day, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday.